The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, this is Tom Lane, DM2 Software's Vice President of Sales and Marketing. I would like to welcome everybody to today's Internal Controls Before You Get Started webinar. This is the third in a three-part series. Before I introduce today's presenter, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. Because of the number of attendees we have on today's webinar, everyone's phones will stay on mute. If you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them into the question window that you see on the lower right of your screen. We'll try to answer everyone's questions towards the end of the webinar. If we're unable to get to your question, we'll follow up with you individually after the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded. As soon as the recording is available, we will post it along with a copy of today's presentation slides on our website and on our YouTube channel, and I'll send you an email to let you know when they're available to be downloaded. On that note, I would like to introduce today's presenters. We have from our professional service department, we've got consultants Patty Hendrickson, Laurel Stover, Cade Evans, and Steve Silkiatis. On that note, I will hand it over to them and they'll go through today's internal controls webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Patty Hendrickson, and please join me and the rest of our team in our adventure in learning about internal controls before you get started. Thank you for taking the time to join us today to learn more about internal controls. Part 1 covered after you updated your transactions. In Part 2, we focused on in-process transactions, order of operations, process documentation, and key update controls and reports. Today, our last installment of the series, we'll go over before you get started checklists, key user documentation, key tools to document, and key reports to include in your checklist and documentation. Internal control is a crucial aspect of any organization's governance system and ability to manage risk. It is also fundamental to supporting the achievement of an organization's objectives and creating, enhancing, and protecting stakeholder value. High-profile organizational failures typically lead to the imposition of additional rules and requirements, as well as subsequent time-consuming and costly compliance efforts. However, this obscures the fact that the right kind of internal control, enabling an organization to capitalize on opportunities while offsetting the threats, can actually save time and money and promotes creation and preservation of value. Effective internal control also creates a competitive advantage, as an organization with effective internal control can take on additional risk. Despite the existence of sound internal control guidelines, it is often the application of such guidelines that fails or could be further improved in many organizations. For purposes of this presentation, we are focusing on control activities, specifically process controls as they relate to DM2 and MAS 100 ERP. A few years ago, in an effort to help our customers be best prepared for an implementation, the professional services team read a book that has helped many of our customers, The Checklist Manifesto by Atal Gawande. He's a doctorate from Harvard Medical School. Throughout this presentation, we will refer to this book. It is a quick read and highly recommended. I have personally implemented these principles at home, in my daily work tasks, and with customers with much success. From getting my 4-year-old ready to bed to processing bill of lading, checklists can make a big difference. When you get on a plane, do you ever look into the cockpit and see what the pilots are doing? Well, after the movie Airplane, I usually try to make sure they didn't order fish for dinner. Anyhow, next time you get on a plane, check and you will see notebooks behind the pilot and in the flight attendant station. These notebooks are a series of checklists to follow for all possible situations and scenarios. A friend of mine is a flight attendant and makes it very clear that while they may serve drinks and snacks and hand out digiplayers, their primary purpose is safety. And that checklist binder is how they know you are safe and how they know what to do in any situation. You may possibly be annoyed by a 2-hour flight delay caused by one of the checklists and they find an issue. But wouldn't you rather they fix the engine or oxygen supply before you get into the air? February 9, 2009, Flight 1549 takes off, and both of the Airbus A320 engines had been heavily damaged by a flock of birds, and attempts to restart the engines had failed. Local airports were too far away, forcing an attempt at an almost unprecedented water landing. An automated cockpit warning system was screeching that they were too low. Co-pilot Jeffrey Skiles was able to go through the checklist with the pilot and Captain Chelsea Sullenberger. No one was injured, everyone was safe, and in a situation that all odds would have been against them. News reports and the FAA credit the checklist that guided them through this process. The pilot and crew were described as cool, calm, and collected, and most of all heroic, because they followed a checklist properly. Did they practice this every day? Surely not. Did they have training a while back on how to do something like this? Sure. But would they have remembered all of the steps without the checklist? Likely not. And this story could have turned out very different without their checklist. Checklists are an ounce of prevention that are worth the pound of cure in almost every instance, and your business is no exception. Best of, top 10, and to-dos. We are fascinated with lists, using them to organize our lives and organize information. But according to Atul Gawande, it's the checklist we should pay attention to. Gawande shows just how powerful, well-designed, and properly implemented checklists can be in reducing mistakes in fields such as medicine, aviation, construction, and finance. And he says we can all benefit from them no matter what type of work we do. Yet many of us often resist the mundane task of ticking a box or following a preset protocol. We see ourselves as intelligent, competent beings capable of relying on our own judgment, memory, or perceived thoroughness, especially when it comes to the routine tasks. Even the most skilled among us miss critical steps that can lead to unintended consequences. Consider, hold on just a second. Oh boy. I only had a checklist that would have told me what to do here. Consider a checklist a recipe. You can make chili 100 different ways, and you can have your special chili recipe. But all it takes is doubling the Tabasco one time to realize that maybe looking at the recipe for the exact details wasn't that bad. And note, this has nothing to do with the chili sitting in my fridge. In his book, Gawande suggests that people tend to fail for two main reasons. The first is ignorance, having only a partial or incomplete understanding of the task in front of us. The second is ineptitude, instances where we have the knowledge but we fail to apply it correctly. But it's not ignorance that leads us into mistakes in this world. We have access to more and more information, and our knowledge base is growing every day in every field. It's the complexity of our world that's increasing, making it more difficult to deploy our knowledge predictably and routinely. Medicine is becoming more sophisticated, same with rising skyscrapers and responding to natural disasters. As the complexity and challenges and problems and tasks we face increase, we can't rely on our memory to do routine and help us perform at the highest level. Checklists remind us of the minimum necessary steps and make them explicit. They not only offer the possibility of verification, but also instill a kind of discipline of higher performance. Under conditions of complexity, not only are checklists a help, they are required for success. There must always be room for judgment, but judgment aided and even enhanced by procedure. Intelligent, educated, and experienced people resist having tasks or procedures that seem routine reduced to a checklist. Want to avoid this in your organization? Build good checklists. Bad checklists are long, impractical, and vague. Often they're designed by people with no real hands-on experience of the situation or the nature of the task, and often they're tossed aside. Kawande offers some basic tips for good checklists. Make them precise. They should be efficient, to the point, and easy to use in the most difficult of situations. Don't try to spell everything out. Those are the decisions the user should be making. Provide reminders of only the most critical and important steps, the ones that even highly skilled professionals using them could miss. Above all, make sure they're practical. But no matter how good they are, remember, by themselves, checklists cannot make anyone follow them. Whether in medicine, customer service, or the fuel industry, predictable, repeatable results are the cornerstone of the most successful businesses. One of the simplest ways of achieving high performance is eliminating unnecessary mistakes, especially when pride is the largest obstacle. Part of the beauty of the checklist is the versatility. You can use them as a way to ensure proper execution or as a tool when things don't go as planned. The airline industry is a perfect example. Pilots go through a number of pre-flight checklists to make sure everything is in order and no steps were overlooked. And for an issue mid-flight, they again refer to the checklist to take corrective action. Here are 3 suggestions on how you can implement checklists more effectively. Identify areas of opportunity. What areas of your business could benefit from a checklist? How could you begin to reduce the number of mindless mistakes that lead to unhappy customers, failed execution, or even something far worse? Try it on a small scale, even if you don't think you need it. Throughout the entire book, ego seems to be the largest obstacle to implementing checklists. Remember, they're not intended to undermine your intelligence or ability. They're a tool to combat the increasingly complex nature of our lives. Automation in software is an example of this. Curate. Not everything requires a checklist, nor are they effective for every situation. The key is using them only in the most essential places and to be diligent about making them practical and precise. The Checklist Manifesto is a short, fast read, but don't be fooled. Its implications are great. As we continue to have greater access to information and the ability to acquire knowledge in various industries and fields, it will be those who can deploy it the most reliably who will succeed. On at least 3 occasions in 2007, surgeons at one Rhode Island hospital operated on the wrong side of a patient's head. In one case, a resident neurosurgeon incorrectly started the surgery of an 82-year-old patient. The surgeon noticed the error before reaching the skull and stitched up the wound, but the health department fined the hospital $50,000. This sort of error is not terrifically rare. Based on malpractice judgments and out-of-court settlements for things like operating on the wrong side of a patient or the wrong patient or leaving a sponge or other surgical object inside of a patient, researchers at Johns Hopkins estimate that such errors called never events by many hospital risk managers occur not never, but more than 4,000 times in the U.S. every year. In recent years, the solution in preventing this sort of error has become a seemingly simple one, using checklists. The idea is that using checklists could prevent this sort of surgical error and other associated and often massive costs. Doctors, like we do, often have many concerns competing for limited space in their immediate attention. When faced with a procedure that they performed 1,000 times, entering a bill of lading, for instance, a surgeon can often overlook a basic tenet Like, for instance, double check that they are cutting on the right side of the head. Most checklists also ensure that the necessary instruments, extra blood, surgical equipment are on hand. They also lay the groundwork for good communication, asking that all members of the surgical team have introduced themselves and that the surgeon has gone through the critical elements of the procedure with the team prior to beginning. In fact, use of a straightforward 19-point checklist was able to decrease the rate of death in or after surgery by almost half. Looking at these success rates, what processes would you like to execute more proficiently in your organization? What processes or tasks do you find the most prone to error at your company? After thinking about this for a moment, Steve's going to help us with some ideas as well as how we go about the next step for creating our own checklist. I hope at this point you're looking forward to solving some major issues at your company through checklists.
Thanks, Patty. So today we're going to talk about setting up checklists related to many of the modules that are critical to your day-to-day operations. We're going to discuss which ones you should strongly consider creating a checklist for. We're also going to answer the why and why you should be setting up a checklist for those setups. Due to the limited time that we have for the presentation, we're going to touch lightly on each of the which ones, but we'll go into a little bit more depth on a few of them. If you'd like more information on creating in-depth checklists, you can be sure to attend one of our DM2U classes. The Customer Master has a number of very important fields that need to be considered for a checklist and filled out accurately while setting up a new customer. The main and additional tabs are the primary tabs that contain critical field information. One of those critical fields you'd want to have on a checklist is to be maintaining for every customer is the tax schedule field. The tax schedule field is going to drive the inclusion or exclusion of sales tax. If your customer is exempt from sales tax, then you would need to enter in their exemptions utilizing the Exemptions button. You wouldn't want to miss that on your checklist. In item maintenance, we have many fields critical to the accuracy and success of your operations. With as many potential fields to fill out accurately, a checklist comes in handy. The unit of measure fields for purchasing, standard, and sales are important as they will establish your conversion factors for receiving and relieving your inventory accurately. Your product line establishes the general ledger code that will be used for sales and returns, cost of goods sold, inventory, purchases clearing, and PO and manufacturing variances. So you would want to be sure to have the correct general ledger code associated with your product lines. Through product line maintenance, you can set up default values for many of the item maintenance fields. Those default values will then auto-populate when you select the product line for your item. The default values can then be changed if necessary. In Cardlock site product maintenance sessions, it's imperative that your sales GL is accurate. You'll also want to be sure to cross-reference to the correct inventory items so that your inventory, if interfaced to the IM module, will be relieved accordingly. And of course, you would want to be sure to have the correct warehouse against the site product so that your appropriate warehouse's inventory is deducted. Within vendor maintenance, the terms code is one of the more significant fields to have on your checklist. It drives your AP aging and your check runs, which ultimately affect your cash flow. If your vendor is a non-inventory vendor, the default general ledger account code should also be on your checklist. That's found on the additional tab. It will save your accounts payable rep time and ensure accuracy. If your newly set up vendor is a bill of lading vendor, you'll have several more screens that we suggest having checklists for, including pickup point code maintenance, fuel cost table maintenance, vendor fuel tax, and bill of lading product maintenance. In the General Ledger Account Maintenance screen, the end-of-day field, or EOD field, on the main tab of this screen is used in conjunction with the end-of-day processing and reporting that Patty discussed about in our Part 1 webinar. This should be on our GL account maintenance checklist to ensure you have each of your end-of-day accounts assigned so your end-of-day reporting is accurate. User and role maintenance may not be maintained frequently, so having a checklist handy could be key. You can set up a new role and/or change roles, and then change your personnel's access at any point in time by referring to the checklist. In our example above for role maintenance, you may want to have a checklist item to ensure that you turn on or off the ability for a certain role, such as allowing price overrides in sales order data entry. It would be handy to have this checklist in order to create a new user code for that employee that just started in the accounts receivable department. Customer pricing is definitely an area that you will want to have an established checklist for to ensure your pricing is functioning properly within the DM2 system. There are many different ways to set up pricing: by item, by customer, price level, and price table. You can also establish contract pricing and quantities and consume those quantities against the contract. Which way are you pricing? And do you have the step-by-step roadmap documented? Next, Laurel is going to be talking about tax updates. Laurel?
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to start by discussing tax updates. Maintaining a checklist for tax updates can be very useful. Tax rates typically don't change often, so you may be asking yourself, where do I go? What do I do? Remember, these are just a couple of the screens that affect taxes. You will want to cover both fuel taxes and sales taxes within your checklist to ensure you cover your full tax base. On the next screen, we're going to talk about interfaces. Interfaces are another arena that may not be used frequently and would be great to have a checklist so you don't miss any steps. Those missed steps could lead to missed supplementals, like our ConocoPhillips example that you see here. Next, we'll discuss IT processes checklists. There are a variety of periodic activities, more information technology oriented, that may be candidates for a checklist. What steps do you need to perform in order to create a test server or move a server? Maybe a new employee needs their workstation set up, and they also need crystal reports. A checklist for these items will reduce the time involved in accomplishing these tasks that we don't perform very often. Process checklists are imperative to have documented for backup and for new personnel, especially when people are out on vacation, sick, or on personal leave. The backup employee will then have documentation they can follow and fall back on when someone is unexpectedly absent. Bill of lading and Cardlock processing are two key areas that we feel are imperative to have such documentation. We do highly recommend that all modules and processes are documented. You never know who's going to be missing and when. Now we will discuss why we set up checklists. So why do we need to set up checklists? First, we need to have consistent results within the day-to-day operations of the business. If we don't have consistency, we lose efficiency in performing the role or roles, which would then lead to higher operating costs. We also need to have the data and reporting to be accurate. If it's not accurate, customer fulfillment could be impacted negatively, which could lead to the loss of customers. Financial information could be overstated or understated, and potentially even materially overstated or understated. This could ultimately lead to potential issues with banks and or shareholders and the going concern of the organization. As previously mentioned, checklists can be a very useful tool when faced with employee turnover and or time off. You will still want to be able to invoice your customers and not affect your cash flow negatively just because John or Sue is out on vacation or out sick. Checklists can provide accountability for your employees. If you're going to hold your employees accountable for their job performance, you better have the process or processes documented so they have a tool to benchmark them against. Your employees can also be accountable for keeping your checklists up to current operating procedures. Even though we suggest you create checklists for all processes, you should at least create checklists for the processes that are least frequently performed. We also recommend that you set a frequency of how often you should audit and update your checklists. It doesn't do your employees any good to follow a checklist where the process has changed and the documentation has not. Now that we've talked about what checklists we should have and why we should have them, we'll take a slightly more detailed look at a few areas and what their checklist should look like. In this slide, you can see a typical accounting checklist for month end. Checklists can be done for many daily and weekly procedures, as well as less frequently performed tasks. If you are having trouble creating a checklist, the Internet can often have examples to help you begin your checklist. Our first example is a more detailed procedural checklist for a fuel tax rate update. We are walking through step by step each area the user will need to go into in order to not only determine whether or not rates need to be updated, but also how to update those rates. Step 1 tells the user where exactly on the menu they need to go to look at the vendor fuel tax rates. We recommend that more complicated processes have detailed documentation to go along with the checklist for what-if scenarios, or if there are issues, or for new employees. Cade will cover this in more detail in the next section. Once the user has gone into the vendor fuel tax maintenance screen, the next step is telling them to print the report. From there, the user will be analyzing the report to find the appropriate vendors and pickup points they will need to update. And finally, they are being instructed on where exactly to go and create the new tax rate for that vendor/pickup point combination. Another light example for a checklist would be for deploying a custom report. Your first step is to make sure that your custom crystal report name ends with the word custom, and the name is 30 characters or less. You will then want to verify which module folder you would like to deploy the report to. You will then select the file folder location where the report currently exists. This could be on your desktop or on a shared drive. Next, you will want to decide on a name for the custom report. You now will want to decide on what roles within the organization will have access to the report. Once you deploy the report, you will need to make sure you run it once in order to convert it to the latest version of Crystal Report so that your users will not run into this message telling them to perform the activity. This also allows you to test the report, which is your last step on your checklist. Now I am going to turn this over to Cade, who will be going over user documentation.
Thanks, Laurel. User documentation is a companion to your checklist. As a person goes through their checklist, they may come to a step they don't know how to do or perform, if it's a function they don't normally do or one that isn't done very often. The user documentation will provide a quick reference for how they should complete that step to be in line with the procedures of your specific company. What is user documentation and what isn't it? Well, your company's user documentation is not software documentation. This isn't meant to describe every single field you may see on a given screen. While there will be some field descriptions, you aren't writing for information giving, but more for training. There's a not so subtle difference between the two. This documentation is not interchangeable. You couldn't take the documentation you create and share it with ABC Oil, who is also a DM2 user, and have that work for them. This documentation is specific not just to DM2 software, but to how your company uses it and what procedural rules you have in place for setup and usage of our system. This is a document showing how a user performs a particular function in the software, such as how to enter a sales order or how to set up a new customer. It will probably describe the fields, but it must tell users what to do in each of those important fields. To emphasize, it tells both what a screen or field is and what the user should do with those fields or screens. Why should we have user documentation? User documentation ensures that users are entering information into the system in a consistent way. The old adage of garbage in, garbage out definitely applies in this situation. If your documentation is created and kept up to date, you will have a consistent result from your system. This consistency creates accuracy, so you know you can trust the reports you receive from the system. I'm sure none of you have ever had employee turnover or sick leave or maternity leave, so this probably doesn't matter, but just in case it does, someday when you have those things happen, you will dramatically decrease mistakes that are made by that new person or the person filling in by having to update up-to-date user documentation. User documentation also ensures people know how to perform their function so they can more reasonably be expected to be accountable for how they use the software. The phrase, "No one told me not to do it like that," shouldn't be heard because the document is clear and concise. You are also making sure you don't have bad or missing data. This should mean less repetition because of mistakes that have to be corrected and then re-entered, which again saves you time and money as a business. Now I'd like to walk through some screenshots and discuss some examples of the verbiage that might go along with that screen. First one is a fuel tax exemption example. Any user documentation should, like you see here, tell the user where to find the function. Here it tells me it's in Petrolink, Maine, fuel tax exemption by customer. The remainder of the user documentation text may say something like this. Choose the customer and ship to location. If the customer has all locations in the same taxing jurisdiction, simply tab through that area. At ABC Fuels, we don't enter any exemptions based on a specific product. We do it based on the fuel tax group. Enter the region codes. You can get a listing of these for customers and ship-tos from the head of accounts receivable. Local 3 is what we use for the county. Local 5 is for the city, and Local 6 is what we use for load fee exemptions. Once you have updated these exemptions, email the head of accounts receivable stating which customers have been updated and what the new expiration dates are. So in that example, we see that not only did it tell us something about the fields, but it told us specifically what to do and if we need a list or something, whom to go to get that. In sales tax exemption, you can see that we've used a shape to call attention to the area that we're documenting. The verbiage to accompany this screenshot could be very simple. In the Customer Maintenance main tab window, click on the exemption button in the tax schedule area. This will open up the tax exemption screen. Then we see the sales tax exemption screen. Exemptions are entered based on the taxing authority. If anything is written in the exempt field, it will exempt the customer from the sales tax code. Here at ABC Fuels, we use the actual customer exemption number. Again, it's giving information as well as speaking specifically to how that company utilizes that function. In the next screen, we have excise tax reporting and maintenance. So here it tells us where to do or where to go and what to do in a very concise way. And your user documentation can be short and to the point, as we see here. The litmus test for whether your user documentation is good is to give it to a coworker who's not familiar with your position. If they can do your job using your documentation, then you've done it right. In creating user documentation, there are many tools that you can use to make them more clear and more concise. Creating user documentation many times requires images and at times process flowcharts. Some of the tools you can use to begin with are Sage 100 ERP Help System. Within the Software Help menu, you can find a lot of software-type documentation that can help you to describe what the fields are. You can also access the menu from the Help area in the top menu bar, or in each window that you open, there's a small question mark at the lower right that can be used, as we can see in this screenshot here. You can use this to help put together the documentation for your company. It will allow your users or documenters to focus more on the specifics of how your company uses the software, and let Sage provide the verbiage for explaining what the fields are. As we implement the software for the first time, we emphasize how important creating user documentation is. If you created that documentation, it may only need to be updated for new features or changes in procedure within your company. If you didn't, this will be a great learning experience. Screenshots are important in providing visual clarity within your documentation. And most of you have probably done the print screen. This is helpful, but a lot of the time you end up with a full screen and you just wanted to see the small window in the middle of the screen, and once you put it in a document, it becomes very difficult to read. So instead of using that, there are some other tools you can use that will capture just a portion of the screen so you see just the things that you want to see. If you are a Windows 7 or later user, there is a built-in tool that will do this. It's called the snipping tool. It's found in the accessories folder, and if you want to, you can actually follow along rather quickly. So you hit your start menu below, then you go to all programs, go to your accessories folder, and there you find the snipping tool. That will allow you to that will open up the window you see there on my slide, and we now see in this window. You can grab and show just that portion of the screen that you desire to keep. If you have Microsoft Office that includes OneNote, then you can also use OneNote to capture a portion of the screen. The keyboard shortcut to do that is the Window key plus the S key at the same time. Another tool I know a lot of people like is called Snagit. It has very good functionality, but it may be more than what you need. But if you want it, that's definitely a great tool. Now, as you put your document together in Microsoft Word, you can use auto shapes like call-out boxes or shapes to highlight or draw attention to certain areas on the page. As was mentioned before, process flow is an extremely important part of what you do. It's great for showing documentation of process flow, or flowcharts are great for showing the data flow or workflow in a process, as you can see in the example here. It provides a visual map of action and reaction based on answers or decisions that happen during your processes. Process flowcharts are valuable in helping ensure functions occur in the correct sequence. They also help people understand how what they do impacts others in the organization and how important the accurate and timely completion of their task is. Documenting your process flows is also an interesting exercise which will force conversations on how we've always done it versus how we should really do it. Clearly documenting and simplifying your process flows can yield significant returns in efficiencies gained. To help you achieve those or create those, Visio is the software tools built specifically for those types of flowcharts. As such, it may be more powerful than many of you need, but it is a great tool. Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint can also be used to create process flow documentation. You can find flowchart symbols in the Auto Shapes feature of Microsoft Word. You right-click to add text to the boxes. You can use the Auto Shape connectors, and the connecting lines will stay attached to what you are highlighting even when you move the boxes. The link shown here is for a Microsoft tutorial on how to create process flowcharts using Microsoft Word and PowerPoint if you're unfamiliar with that. So I'm going to give you 2 quick seconds to use Snippet or Snagit or whatever tool you want to use, and you can grab that right off the screen. If you don't have that tool quickly available, these will be posted later. And now I'm going to hand the time back to Patty so that she can review some key reports for our checklists and documentation.
Thank you, Cade. As we're preparing documentation and checklists, it's important to make sure there are steps for validating data Remember on Laurel's example, the last thing that she said is test the report. This is testing your data transaction entry. This section of the presentation will provide key reports for internal control and what they can be used for. Key accounting control reports for general ledger include General Ledger Trial Balance, which is commonly used as a periodic check of balances of all accounts. It contains a summarized listing for the selected accounting period of all activity and accounts. General Ledger Detail Report provides valuable information about transactions for each account. This information includes the journal where they posted to and where they originated from. General Ledger Detail by Source Report provides a recap of general ledger transactions sorted by source journal, posting date, and entry number. This report is helpful when the source journal is known for an entry, but you do not know which accounts were affected. The Source Journal History Report provides valuable information about transactions affecting a specific source journal or range of source journals. The information on the report includes the source journal description, the source module from which the journal was updated, journal or register number, posting date, date of the update, the user who updated the journal, and the amount. Key accounting control reports for accounts payable include the Accounts Payable Trial Balance, which provides a complete recap of accounts payable balances as of the last day of the month. The Accounts Payable Expense by General Ledger Account Report produces a report displaying each invoice posted by account number. The information on the report includes a vendor number, invoice date, source journal, transaction date, and distribution amount. The report can be run to show paid invoices, open invoices, or all invoices. In Invoice History Inquiry in Accounts Payable, you can use this to view detailed or summary information, including the invoice header and your general ledger distribution detail. You can view the complete journal entry that was posted to General Ledger. In the Accounts Payable Payment History Inquiry, you can use this to view information for all checks entered in the system. Information displayed includes vendor number and name, check date, check type, source journal, comment, and amount. You can view the complete journal entry posted to General Ledger as well. The key accounting control reports for accounts receivable include the Accounts Receivable Trial Balance, which provides a complete recap of the accounts receivable invoices, detailing receipts and adjustments and all other activities which affect accounts receivable balances. The Aged Invoice Report is used to tie to the General Ledger Control Account. Running this report for open invoices should balance to the General Ledger. Invoice History Inquiry, which can be used to view detailed or summary invoice information, including invoice header and General Ledger distribution detail. You can view the complete journal posted to General Ledger. As you update invoices in sales order, accounts receivable is also updated. Use the reports from accounts receivable to track your invoices and analyze your sales, which include the Accounts Receivable Trial Balance, the Aged Invoice Report, Invoice History Inquiry. The Open Sales Order Report can be used to identify what orders are outstanding, on hold, or need to be followed up on. One thing to note in sales order inquiries is when you pull up an invoice, it will only show invoices invoiced out of sales order invoice. In accounts receivable, when you go into Invoice History Inquiry, it will show you invoices updated in both sales order and accounts receivable. The key control reports for inventory management include the Inventory Management Trial Balance. This provides a recap of inventory activity for the current period, including the beginning and ending balances for both quantity and cost. No, the beginning balance is calculated during the period end process. Therefore, for this report to be accurate, you must close inventory management in a timely manner. The detailed transaction report provides a list of activity for the specified date range. The report displays the beginning on-hand balance for the month, followed by every transaction posted, including sales, receipts, issues, adjustments, and transfers. If inventory management is integrated with search, sales order, and purchase order, transactions entered into those modules are included on the report. If retaining history is checked, you can review any transactions not manually purged with this report. If you're not retaining any history, this is an option out in the inventory options, then only the current period transactions are available. The inventory stock status report provides an overview of the current stock levels compared with what you have set in as the default. Inventory valuation report determines the current value of the on-hand quantity for each item. Key accounting control reports for purchase order include the purchases clearing report. At the end of the period, verify the amount in the purchases clearing account equals the amount of the goods received, but not invoiced. Receipt inquiries allow you to drill down on the specific GL posting on a specific transaction, as well as look at the transaction entry. There are several options for creating your report, including Crystal Reports, Excel queries, DM2 SQL warehousing, Advanced Lookup Engine, Lookup, Business Insights Reporter, Sage Intelligence, and Visual Integrator. By using one of these tools, you can write, test, and save the report to avoid rewriting the report each time you want updated information by using the ODBC connection. It is recommended to catalog your report so that you have a place to see if the report already exists or a similar report already exists. When possible, save this to the system using the menu, views, lookup listing, or Visual Integrator jobs menu for easier and more public access. Continuing on with the do-it-yourself custom reporting, some common uses for your customized reports to meet your specific business needs are exception reports. These can be on completed and updated transactions, in-process transaction, and master file setups. Additionally, we find customers like to look at their margin history in unique ways. These tools help to allow you to slice and dice reports in a way you find most helpful. You can review transactions before they're updated with a customized report and make corrections before they're updated, eliminating the need for credit and rebuilds. Additionally, you can provide reports to your customers in formats they need for external reporting or for importing invoices into their accounting system. The flexibility of these reporting tools is extensive, and you may want to ask your professional services consultant what options are best for the report you would like to develop. Finally, we find that customers like to use custom reporting options to assist in their daily and monthly reconciliation processes. Please note that some reporting tools are more versatile than others. Some tools are easier to learn than others, Excel-based versus database or programming-based. The more tools you are able to master, the better options you will have available to you. Please note that you are limited to what is installed and licensed on your workstation and or server and how you're able to access the software. Please note that you are never alone. DM2 consultants can help you write reports, instruct you which reporting tools will work best for your purpose, and assist you when you need help finding the right files, fields, and links. We can also help with troubleshooting new or modifying existing reports. Using the following resources, you can locate information that will aid you when you're creating and modifying your Sage 100 ERP reports and forms in Crystal Reports. For all supported Sage 100 versions, you can use the Technical Reference and Support Guide, TRSG, located on the Sage Software online website. Additionally, you can use the Sage info source entries on the Sage Software online website. During our presentation, we referred to contacting professional services for additional help if needed. We want to review this process for doing this, and we thought a checklist might be a good idea. Go to the DM2 website. Find the Professional Services option on the blue menu. On the right, select How May We Help You? And select I would like to request professional services. Complete the form and submit to our professional services team. Thank you for taking the time to join us today and learn more about internal controls. In Part 1, we covered transactions you had updated. In Part 2, we focused on in-process transactions, order of operations, process documentation, and key pre-update controls and reports. Today, our last installment of the series, we went over before you get started, checklists, key user documentation, key tools to document, and key reports to include in your checklist and documentation. While we may not be flying planes or doing brain surgery, consistent and accurate entry are required for the results we need in reporting and customer, business, and payments. We have an opportunity before us, not just in medicine, but in virtually any endeavor. Even the most expert among us can gain from searching out the patterns of mistakes and failures and putting a few checks in place. But will we do it? Are we ready to grab onto that idea? That's from the Checklist Manifesto. Coming soon, the DM2 University will have internal control classes. We've had much demand in training in reconciliation and internal controls, and learning more practical ways to use your DM2 Sage 100 ERP software to do this. In these classes, we will be going over in detail reconciliation and controls for building checklists and user documentation. We will also have a class to address key controls for each of the major business lines. As we release these online, interactive, and transactional-based courses, Tom and his team will be letting you know when and where your accounting team can sign up. We hope you have enjoyed this series, and we look forward to seeing you in these classes this fall. Tom?
All right, Patty, thank you. Very good segue. This is our DM2 University class schedule that you'll find in the events calendar section on our website. You can see we have a number of classes currently available, and as Patty mentioned, as soon as they put the final touches on the internal controls class, we'll have that up as well. So if you go to our website, using that same drop-down menu that Patty showed you in the previous couple of slides, you can register for any one of these classes. And one thing that I'd like to point out, with the exception of the CRM Bootcamp class, these classes actually follow the same, use the same material and follow the same curriculum that Sage has invested a lot of time and money to put together. And the reason we can do that is our own Denise Austin is a certified Sage trainer. So because of that, she's able to leverage all the tools that are available through Sage. So these are very high quality classes. We encourage you to register for them. If you move on to the next slide. Thank you, Patty. We are not going to be holding a webinar next month. This is where I would normally plug next month's webinar, because we have brought back our Connections user conference. The conference is running the 13th through the 15th. The 13th, if you look at your calendar, is a Sunday. It's actually starting out in the evening with a welcome reception. You can get your registration materials at that time and network not only with the DM2 staff, but your peers, as well as most of the partners that we work with as well will be in attendance there. And then we'll have a full day on Monday of general sessions, and we'll go up until about 3 o'clock on Tuesday. And you can see some of the topics that we'll be covering in those general sessions. Based on the feedback we've gotten from our customers, we decided to do away with the separate breakout sessions and keep this conference a little bit higher level. And then we've also built in plenty of opportunities to network. That seems to be one of the big reasons people enjoy coming to our user conferences, not only network with their peers, but the DM2 staff as well as our partners. And we will be bringing in all of our professional service consultants to attend the conference. So we'll look forward to having you there. And one other thing is the early bird registration ends tomorrow at midnight. So if you register by tomorrow at midnight, you can save yourself $50 on the admission there. And as usual, we're holding this across the street from our headquarters in Vancouver, Washington at the beautiful Heathman Lodge. So we'll look forward to having you all join us there. And just one more slide, Patty, before I turn it over to you guys for the Q&A. You saw this previously on one of Patty's slides, but this has been updated since she took her little snippet there. So you can see if you go to the How May We Help You menu that you can find in the header of every one of our web pages, you'll see the drop-down menu here, and you can select registering for a user conference, as well as register for any of the DM2 University classes that we have available in addition to the other services that you can inquire about. So on that note, I'd like to open it up for questions. Check our question window to see if we have anything yet. Actually, we don't have any questions at this point, so let's give it, we've got a few minutes before the session ends, so let's give it a minute or two for you to enter your questions. And I know that was a lot of material that was being covered, so if you do think of a question after this session ends, feel free to email us your question at sales@dm2.com. And actually, we've got the first question here is from Lance. And Lance is asking, will the presentation be available online? And actually, that is going to be posted on our website probably by the end of today. As soon as I have the presentation material posted and the recording of this webinar uploaded to our YouTube channel, I'll send everybody a message to let you know that those are available. All right, it doesn't look like we have any other questions at this time. Since we are close to our ending time, I would like to thank everybody for attending, thank our presenters. I guess did a very nice job as usual. And then I just want to remind everybody that today's webinar has been recorded and will be posted up on our YouTube channel and our website along with the presentation slides shortly. And I'll send you a message to let you know when they're available. And again, if you have any questions after we end this session, feel free to email us at sales@dm2.com. I'd like to thank everybody again for attending, and that concludes today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.